What's up, boss?
Hey, not much, Wesley.
As of us recording this is the Tuesday of the week following your first Sunday back after 3 weeks.
Yeah.
3-week break. Yeah. It's good to have you back.
Yeah. 3-week break. I had a couple of weddings and a funeral in there, so, my brain was still engaged. But
3-week break from the pulpit, I guess.
Yeah. We're just letting the tension build before David really ruins it, so.
I will say, it was very nice to have you back. And
Thank you.
I'm going to tell a quick story because it's, I think, an outstanding compliment. So, Sunday morning, I don't remember if it was before the first hour or between hours, like after life group was over, whatever. I went to go use the restroom, and I was in and out. I think I was in a hurry, so I wasn't trying to talk to anybody. And minding my own business. And I heard 3 different guys strike up a conversation. They're all like, "Oh, Greg's back today. Oh, man, I'm so glad Greg's back. I bet he's got some pent-up aggression." And then it all finished with, "Man, I'm so happy to have my pastor back." So, grown men that I have respect for saying stuff like that. So,
they just want me to train wreck up there and get all aggressive. That's what. No, I appreciate that. That's kind.
No, but I agree. I guess I'll give you the compliment too. So, But anyways, for today's topic, and again, I like to come, whenever I get asked to come in here, with topics that either A, I just have a question about, or B, these are areas that I'd like to grow in. But today, mine is just, hey, this is what I have a question about.
Yeah.
And the topic is the Lord's Supper, okay? And I understand, I would like to say I understand for the most part where it came from, why it's a thing, why I got instituted, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about that. But then also kind of want to end with, why does our church handle it the way we do? That makes sense. So, but start off with just, you can get as detailed as you want, or you can give us a big overview. What is the Lord's Supper, and why does it exist?
Okay, I want to be direct before maybe I get a little bit broader. Just again, I know people listen there at different stages, or they got to run do this or whatever. And so if you only get to listen to the beginning of the podcast, the correct answer, I think, for what is the Lord's Supper is it is the really the direct command that Jesus gave to his apostles and subsequently the church to commemorate his death, burial, and resurrection through the breaking of bread and the drinking of, wine and or juice. We've maybe tinkered a little bit even with that element for good reason, but that's what it is. It's, he said, every time that you do this in remembrance of me. And then he gave them the literal, this is what the bread stands for, this is what the juice stands for. And so that's what the Lord's Supper is. It's the commemoration as he instructed us to remember. And so, we have called it an ordinance in the New Testament, or in, the church's function. An ordinance is just something explicitly instructed by Christ to do. I would argue we use that word too narrowly, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But technically, as Baptists, we have 2 ordinances. It would be the believer's baptism and the practice of the Lord's Supper. Again, both explicitly given to us by Christ, but by use it too narrowly, I would say, well, he says, go and make disciples and baptize them. It's funny that we made baptism an ordinance, but we don't make discipleship an ordinance.
Okay.
I would argue discipleship, evangelism, worship, there's enough scripture to warrant all of them to be considered direct commands and ordinances of the early church and our church. But anyway, we do baptism, Lord's Supper. So that's the simple answer. Christ gave us this symbolism, this typology of what he was going to do on the cross, and we're to partake of those elements, and every time we do so, we're to reflect on what he has done and why he did it. And I believe there's meant to be an air of celebration, not to be trivial, because we see some incidences with Paul speaking to the early church about abusing, those elements or not taking it seriously. But it's meant to be celebratory. We know why he did it and how it purchases us redemption and new life and heaven. And so that's the simplicity of the Lord's Supper. That's technically what it is.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to broaden it, and this is up to you, really, I think it has deep, deep roots in the Old Testament, and I think maybe even deeper than most people want to go.
I say we go as deep as you'd like to go, because that's something. I can nerd out on a lot of things. We could really get in a heated argument about the current college football playoff situation. I could really get into that, but there is something about the way the New Testament almost. This may be a terrible example, but the Old Testament's like a seed that you throw out, and the New Testament is that seed that's sprouted out of the ground.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so it seems like everything in the New Testament is built off of what has happened in the Old Testament. And I don't want to say replaces it, but almost like finishes it.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the Lord's Supper ties deeply, correct me if I'm wrong, deeply with the Passover meal.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So walk us down that road.
Yeah. Well, and very clearly it does. And I think it's worth saying, you painted this picture that the New Testament maybe in some ways finishes a lot of the typology and the pictures of the Old Testament. I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think we've got to keep that in mind, like with something like the Lord's Supper. We consider it an ordinance. We consider it something very significant for the New Testament church. Reality is there's only about 6 explicit references to the Lord's Supper in the entirety of the New Testament. If we're just looking at Lord's Supper,
so you have John chapter 13, 14, 15.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians, really, what is that, 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And that addressing of the abuses. And then it appears in all 3 Gospels, Christ.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That's the thing is, if you're just looking at that's not very much, for an ordinance. Baptism's mentioned a bit more than that.
Acts.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, if you go to the book of Acts, we want to get really pugilistic about something. Hey, baptism is stressed pretty hard. It's in there a lot, you know. Lord's Supper doesn't even, there's one vague reference in Acts where it says that on the first day of the week they met together for the breaking of bread. Mm-hmm. Everyone that practices the Lord's Supper on a weekly basis will say that's clearly a Lord's Supper reference. Yeah. And they'll say this was why we do the Lord's Supper every week, because that scripture tells us that. And I'm like, it's pretty vague. You can't tell me for sure that's a Lord's Supper reference. I expect more for a, I don't know, for that level of commitment to doing it on a weekly basis. Give me a little more than that. And of course, I'm going to always say, I think if Christ had a specific instruction on how often, when, where, all that, I think we would have got a lot more detail. Yeah. But you go to the 3 Gospels, and it's basically, here's the bread, here's the wine, again, and we've substituted juice. This is what it represents. Do this in remembrance of me. That's all he says. It's like he doesn't say when or any. So all I'm saying in the context of all this is we get very little New Testament scripture when it comes to the Lord's Supper service. We argue about a lot of things. We have denominational differences on practice. We have transubstantiation, which, let's be honest, did not become an argument until about the 9th century, introduced by Catholicism. It's not... I'll be blunt, it's not biblical. I wouldn't call it irreverent. I respect some of the language that's used. Yeah. But again, it's not what Christ said. It's not. Anyway, so we have all this stuff that's sprung up, but I'm telling you, there's not but about 5 explicit references. Yeah. And so we kind of have to ask the question, okay, was Jesus drawing upon anything from Israel's past? And I certainly believe, yes, Passover is almost a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of picture of Lord's Supper. You have the lamb that is killed, and the body is broken, and the blood is shed, and they were to be sustained by the food, by eating that. Well, it's a pretty good 1-to-1 picture, of the Lord's Supper, and I think that's where its roots came. And when Christ first did it with the apostles, it was actually the night that they were celebrating Passover. So again, it kind of messes up those who say, well, Jesus did it for the first time, on a Sunday. Like, actually, he didn't. Passover did not occur on a Sunday at that time. Again, I think the early church is very clear. Sunday was the first day of the week, and we meet together on Sunday. I don't want to quibble about all that. I'm just saying, if you're like, well, you can't do the Lord's Supper on any day but Sunday, I'm like, actually, Jesus and the apostles
You did it on Thursday night.
Yeah, I mean, so come on. Yeah, there's just a lot of that stuff that we argue about that I'm like, if we're being explicit to Scripture, we're taking some extra biblical stances, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking to enrich my view of the Lord's Supper, I'm going to go back to Old Testament. I'm going to go back to Passover. In truth, I'm going to go back longer.
Okay.
Because I believe it has a lot more to do with covenant than we like to believe it does.
Okay.
I would argue that baptism and the Lord's Supper are both ordinances that kind of follow in the wake of the institution of the new covenant.
I agree with that.
I think most Baptists, most Anglicans, Protestants, just about everybody would like. Okay, well then let's look at Old Testament covenant. Well, the first explicit covenant cut is with Abram.
Genesis
now,
12.
You could argue it's God with Adam and Eve.
Genesis 3.
Genesis 3. Again, there's a death of something. There's something being broken, and there's not an explicit covenant meal there, but there's some of the elements that you find in the Passover and you find in the Lord's Supper. But then you come to Abram, and there is a covenant meal, and there's the death of an animal and the slaying and all that, and passing between the pieces, separate. Anyway,
before you go, are you talking about where is it Genesis 15 where God? He says the same thing again that he said in Genesis 12. He has him divide the animals in half.
It puts him to sleep.
And God walks through that. That's
Correct.
an ancient Near East covenant where technically Abraham was supposed to walk with him.
Correct. And God did it on his behalf, I think, because he couldn't have withstood the wrath of God. And so the Father and the Son cut covenant on Abram's behalf.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you can look at all that, but there's this typology there, and there's even a meal implied in all of that too, that we see replicated all throughout Old Testament and even ancient histories. Covenant meals were big deals. You made binding promises to someone. You sold land. You exchanged, and you would seal it all with a meal. Even Moses, when he was speaking to God on behalf of the nation of Israel, the elders are summoned at some point following the giving of the law, and there's a covenant meal. Again, they don't see God, but they're in the presence of God. There's so many covenant meals in the Old Testament, and I think the Passover is one of those, and I think the Lord's Supper is one of those, and so I think that's part of what Jesus is saying, my body broken, my blood shed. Remember this, do this in remembrance of me. And what are you remembering? You're not just remembering that he's defeated death, hell, and the grave for us, but you're remembering that he then brought us into his family, that he's preparing a place for us. You're remembering all the tenets of the new covenant that have been extended to us. That makes it a pretty celebratory time, and it makes it a really big deal. And I think to really get all that in its best fullness, we got to understand these other principles, and where does it all find its ultimate fulfillment? Well, there's going to be a day when we'll no longer take the Lord's Supper, but what we're going to have is the marriage supper of the Lamb.
Okay, yeah.
Which is the final fulfillment of all the covenants and all the promises of God. And, you won't need to celebrate the other things anymore because you're going to be in the presence of God and with all the saints in glory. And, I don't know how often we're going to do that, but I think God's going to tell us. I don't think there's one marriage supper of the Lamb. I think that will be something routinely that we enjoy in the glories of heaven. That's just my personal idea. But
now I would assume... we about to go on a rabbit trail just real fast about the marriage supper of the Lamb. That plays into the whole Jewish wedding ceremony where even Jesus says, only the Father knows when I will return. He goes, because I'm going to my Father's place to prepare something for you, and when I'm done, I will return. Well, when's that going to be? Well, only the Father knows.
Yeah.
Well, on their day, the groom-to-be would go build on his father's land. Then the father would say, hey, that is quality job. You may now go get your bride.
Yeah, home's ready.
And then goes and gets his bride. They have the marriage supper, and then life begins with the bride.
Correct.
So that plays into it. But back to the Lord's Supper, Old Testament, all these different things. It was an Old Testament class I took in seminary school that was very necessary for my. I don't know if confidence is the right word, or it just was a stake in the ground that I'm all in. I mean, I was already all in for Jesus, but when I say all in, I think I meant I'm all in to to be about teaching this for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
right? And one of the main ones, you had the story of Abraham offering up Isaac and the whole typology there, but then it was Passover. By the blood of the Lamb, they were brought out of bondage, passed through the Red Sea, and then 50 days later, they cut covenant with God. Jesus dies on Passover. 50 days later is Pentecost, the giving of the new covenant.
Yeah.
All these little different things. But in that, we talked about the Lord's Supper, and they're taking the Passover meal. Is there anything significant about the unleavened bread, like how the leaven represents sin? And he's like, hey, this is my body broken for you. But it's bread without the leaven, and it's like my body, the sinless body, is broken on your behalf. And then there was something to do with the wine, the cup that the cup represented, that it was a routinely thing they did every year. Everybody knew that this cup represents restoration, something like that. It's a throwback to the blood of the Lamb.
Yeah.
Is it wise that we know all those little details, or is it like, we live in the New Testament now and we're fine?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the aspects of the new covenant is I think, we're not under bondage, we're not under law. And so I do think there's some freedom in even, I'm not going to get bent out of shape with other churches and other, pastors or leaders who do things different with the Lord's Supper, because I think that there is no condemnation if you're in Christ, and again, if he wanted us to have this extensive playbook about how to and everything, I think we'd have a lot more information. So, let me just say that I don't think we're to get bent out of shape over it. But I mean, I think just hearing what you're saying about your experience in seminary, I think we're wise in understanding sometimes the more you explore the typology, the more your faith grows, the bigger God gets, the richer it all gets. And you're like, oh, goodness, this is really special
cool.
and significant and cool. And so, yes, I mean, the unleavened bread is a significant part of it because it represents this issue with sin and that Christ was sinless. I mean, I think it helps explain the atonement and the idea that Christ, he couldn't have been a man just like you and I. He couldn't have stumbled and sinned, or none of the atonement works. I mean, there's so many elements there that are portrayed, and you can get into the wine. Again, does it have to be wine? I just don't think that's essential, because at the end of the day, it was picturing blood.
Yeah.
So let's get the blood right, and nobody wants to drink blood. Jesus didn't command us to drink blood. He didn't give the early disciples blood. He gave them a substitute. And so I think we're still free to substitute today. And again, we can get into the whole, their wine was not like our wine. I don't really think that's even necessary. I don't think that really matters. It's just like, one church our size, it's a lot cheaper not to serve wine. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if we're trying to picture something. We're trying to be obedient to the typology. We can substitute, and so we do. And not to mention, you got a 9-year-old out there in our culture that's not supposed to be drinking out, I mean, so we sure aren't going to provide it as a church, So anyway, all that to say, we got to know what it represents. And it makes the picture come alive.
I was about to say, even in that weird time of COVID, that seems like a minor blimp in history that at the time was a major deal. We took the Lord's Supper in our homes.
Yeah.
And I ate, which I guess I'll put this on the interwebs. I am gluten-free, okay? I have to be, or I would live in a hole. But I took a gluten-free saltine cracker and an orange Gatorade.
Yeah.
And I
called it good, huh?
I mean, it got the job done.
Yeah.
So, and my wife, she also drank orange Gatorade and whatever else. She can have gluten, so whatever she chose to eat, I don't know.
Yeah, we tried to tell people in advance, so if they were really picky about the elements, they could go and get something, approximate to what we use or what. But I think again the point was just there is something significant about the Lord's Supper being taken together. In unity and as a corporate body, and I think that's how it was given to the church. But I also think there is more freedom than a lot of people want to practice, just in terms of where and when and how. And I think that was really needed as a people of God at that point in time. And I'm just not going to get bent out of shape over things that Jesus didn't make it seem that critical.
Yeah.
I think by inference, maybe we could relax a little bit.
Okay. Now, the next two rows I want to walk down before we end here. The first one is the New Testament does talk pretty clearly about how we're to be prepared for the Lord's Supper.
Correct.
Now, yeah, we can say, well, it's grape juice or wine. That is what it is, but there is very clear, this is what it means to be prepared to take the Lord's Supper. As the senior pastor of a church, as it is your job to take responsibility to clearly communicate these things to the people that God has allowed you to be the pastor of. How am I supposed to be prepared to go take the Lord's Supper?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Paul makes it very plain that if you enter into the Lord's Supper as a matter of routine or flippantly, without considering the sin in your life and doing a period of introspection and confession, then you're possibly guilty of, not spiritually preparing yourself before the supper.
Sure. And
then he fills in the blanks and says, literally, some of you are sick because you have approached this without sincerity and flippantly. Mm-hmm. And he even adds, and some of you have died.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's there in 1 Corinthians. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that is one of the reasons why I'm completely comfortable not being a church that participates in the Lord's Supper every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Because I think certainly in our culture, whether it was true in the first century or not, it's true now. When you do something every week, it tends to become rote. It tends to become ritual. Mm-hmm. And I just believe, we have tried to, not based upon, any calendar that the Baptists give us or really anything even that our church tradition has generated. We try now to do it at strategic times when there's maybe an extra layer of significance that I hope gets some people's attention because I don't want to be passing out the elements flippantly. I want to give it its proper reverence and respect, but I also am hoping that by doing that, we get everyone's attention and that people know to just, hey, walk in here with a sense of, have I prayed about this? Have I asked God to show me something going on in my heart? Am I again, none of us are going to be altogether righteous when we walk in that room. It's just not, that's why we need a Savior. But if you're screaming and hollering at your wife over something, petty, or you dropped a cuss word on one of your kids because they mouthed off and you felt like striking them, and you walk in there like that, you probably shouldn't partake of the elements unless you've had time to pull your family aside and say, hey, I was in the flesh. You need to make it right. If you can't make it right, that's one of the reasons I always say something about if you're not participating today. I'm just not sure everybody always. What I'm saying is if you're not spiritually prepared, hey, we're glad you're here and you need to reflect on what Christ has done and get, as children of God, we can still celebrate that we're going to be in heaven someday and we've been redeemed, but maybe it would be best for you not to partake of the elements today. Why? Because Paul says there are repercussions if you're not spiritually prepared for this moment.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know how that works. I don't know the equation. I don't know what gets you in the doghouse and what doesn't, but there sure seems to be an implied judgment if you're not right.
Yeah.
What's that look like? When does it rise to the level of death? Hey, that's above my pay grade. But I do feel the weight as a pastor that I shouldn't just flippantly be calling people to the Lord's table without doing all that I can in my power to help them understand it's significant.
Mm-hmm. And so you kind of unintentionally walked down the next lane was about why do we do it as often or the times, I don't want to say as inoften as we do it because that sounds disrespectful, but we do it 3 times a year, but it's always, we do New Year's Day or New Year's Eve that day. Is it New Year's Day?
We have traditionally done it on New Year's Day, but
okay. I didn't want to lie.
Kind of maybe moving that to the Sunday before Christmas now.
Okay.
I like
just
that.
For the Sunday morning aspect of it.
Yeah, and I like the way it informs, Christ was incarnated. This was his ultimate goal, was to defeat death, hell, and the grave. And, anyway, so
I see what you're saying.
I think it helps us by doing it then, it's going to help us inform Christmas a little bit more, so that Christmas isn't just about gifts and Jesus as a baby. Anyway. But,
so we do it. So then we do it Thursday night before Good Friday.
Yeah.
For obvious reason.
If you think Passover is significant.
And then is there one? There's one other time. I feel like there's one other time.
Traditionally, we've done it some both Labor Day and Memorial Day.
Okay.
Kind of depends.
Okay.
And for me, it kind of falls, honestly. We've done it a few other times, like when a sermon series really moved toward the atonement for some reason, or I'm not afraid in that sense. Hey, if it just fits, we're going to probably do it. But our church tradition is we're not tied to any particular calendar days. There was a time back in the past when I think our church pretty much did it like every fifth Sunday. Which would typically be about 4 times a year. But again, that was never like voted on or approved, or it was just tradition, not.
Yeah.
And I'm more inclined to be a little bit more free. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons why we don't do it like regularly scheduled multiple times a year, again, people won't like this probably, but I believe we trivialize sin more today than we have in just about any generation.
What do you mean by that?
Just meaning we tolerate wickedness that previous generations probably would not have tolerated. The pornography that are readily available on people's phones that folks are engaged in. I would even say stuff more pertinent to me as the level of disunity within a church, just backbiting and gossiping, and I don't think we take religious things with the amount of holiness on a regular basis that maybe earlier generations did. Okay. I'm not going to put a date on when I think that fell off, but I think our current culture is pretty generally profane, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
So I'm generally reluctant to roll the Lord's Supper out any more than I think is necessary to, one, honor the Lord, and to picture why we really do what we do. I tend to stay away from it a little bit, because I think there's a lot of people that if Paul's not pulling our leg in 1 Corinthians, they're probably getting themselves in trouble when they walk in here and flippantly prepare for the Lord's Supper. So I'm cautious. Let's put it that way.
So you make it a point to say, make it very clear, hey, in a few weeks, like this day, and then subtract X amount of weeks before that to make clear we're taking the Lord's Supper this day, which obviously I believe is wise. I would like to know the percentage of people that are like, okay, I got to be watching.
Yeah, that would probably tell us something. My theory would be, it's not very many people, which again makes me a little nervous about, here we go, Lord's Supper. That's one of the reasons why I've often done it too, like on a selective, meaning we're going to do it outside of the traditional church hours, so that if you want to do this, you will come on your own accord.
Yeah.
When you do it on a full Sunday, people are kind of there. You know what I mean? You catch, yes, there's Sunday church attenders, but when you do it at a special time, people have to make a special choice to come and to be a part of that. I think you lower the number of people who just sort of walked in and go, oh, Lord's Supper today, here I am, I'll do that. You're at least increasing the odds that they made a willful choice.
That's a good point, and I don't want to be negative here, but I wonder if there is also an aspect of, if it's just more often than not, and it's just a thing that you do, that there are people that will be there on a Sunday morning that have good intentions, but that maybe they have not either fully surrendered their life to Christ and come under His lordship, or B, have some kind of unrepentant sin in their life, and they have a little bit of FOMO, everybody else doing it, I don't want to be the one left out. But I would, because there's been 2 instances that I know of. One was well before I was born, but it happened here. And the man has pulled me to the side and told me a story. And then the other instance was a young man who was like 22 years old that I was friends with. Both of them, one was taking the Lord's Supper and openly repented because he had unrepentant sin. He openly repented to everybody.
Yeah.
And it seems as if from that moment, and what I've heard from him and then from other men in our church, like kind of sort of a revival happened within the church. Revival happened in his home, in his own life, things like that. And then this other young man who has since moved out of state and is working somewhere, whenever he came to me and he confessed sin to me, it wasn't like I looked upon him any differently. If anything, my level of respect for him went, I don't want to say through the roof, but like, my goodness, I have the utmost respect for you that you would actually be willing to take this that serious, Yeah. My level of trust for him went way up, so on and so forth. And so I wonder if it's that thing where, if I really actually confess who I really am, people won't like me as much or whatever the case may be. But in this situation, if we're taking spiritual things serious and walking in actual obedience, I would argue that the Spirit of the Lord is more apt to show up and do a work.
So.
And
I think so.
Well,
so that's at least what I'm praying for. It's what I'm shooting at.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that some. We've had some pretty significant, memorable Lord's Supper services, and I've also though had people not confront me, but say, I don't like it when we do the Lord's Supper because my child wants to participate, and I have to tell them no. And I'm like, whoa.
What a prime opportunity.
Exactly. What's the Lord's Supper picture? It pictures Christ's death, burial, and resurrection.
Yeah.
It pictures salvation. And it's only something you get to participate in if you've had that personal relationship. So this is a gospel moment. I mean, you want your children to be presented with the gospel as many times as possible until they come to know Jesus. And so, I'm kind of like, I have no motivation to apologize to you at all. I mean, you should be thankful that, and these elements are simple. It's clear. If you're in the church at all, you should be able to explain the Lord's Supper to your child.
Sure.
Just on the way home today, explain to them again what it means, and explain to them again. And when you accept Jesus, you'll get to do this with us.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. That's why we come to church, So anyway.
One last little question, and I just had this little aha whenever you're saying this. The Sunday before Christmas, one family service, right?
Yeah.
The Thursday night.
No child care.
No child care.
I want the kids in there. You've
okay.
Already
We're walking down this. I see what you're saying, because I think it was this past Thursday or the past Thursday night, Good Friday. A good number of us younger families sit on the bottom level, which would be your right, but the left, and it was loud.
Yeah.
There were kids everywhere, crayons rolling around on the floor. My kid spilled out a whole bag of Cheez-Its. I mean, but I've never been a crier until after I had a kid. It was the last song, and I'm like, one of my buddies, his kids was on his shoulder. You had this kid, standing in the aisle, whatever. My daughter was right here. I mean, probably 30 toddlers down in that area or more. And I just remember singing and watching it play out, and seeing these guys that I've known all through college, now they're daddies,
Yeah.
Several ladies were pregnant with their first kid or second kid. It might have been one of my most favorite moments.
Yeah. It's powerful.
Collective, yeah.
I love seeing it. It's for me as a pastor, one of my favorite times is being in the Lord's Supper service when people come to the table and their family passes by, and maybe dad serves. You don't have to, but it's an opportunity. I love seeing the faces and love seeing daddies be daddies and moms be moms and have their kids in there. Yeah. It's powerful. And I will say, I love that because I think it's important. I think it's a prime time of instruction. I think it's the way it's supposed to be, even to the point where we do a lot of age-graded instruction of children. I believe in it. It's critical. I think it separates our church from some other churches because we believe in pouring into the lives. But there are a lot of times like that where I can tell you this, there was no child care in the New Testament church.
Oh, yeah.
Kids were in there. They were on people's laps. They were crawling around while Paul was preaching, and that gentleman fell out of the way. I mean, Passover, beauty of the Passover, if you're looking at the pictures on this, it was a lamb for a household.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they did this as a family. They had their little critters crawling around in their laps, and it was all the Lord's Supper is meant to be experienced that same way, I believe. And it's a reminder that if you have children and they don't know Jesus, a day is coming when they have to make that decision,
Yes.
and then they get to walk through that door. So can I use this for two questions? Not really for you, for our audience.
Yeah.
Since we've been talking Lord's Supper, I want to just throw the questions out, and then you can close as you want to close. I've been wrestling with, like, gluten-free individuals. It's bigger issue today than it's probably ever been. It's expensive for us to try to substitute, in general.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way for us maybe to get just a handful of gluten-free options that we put at the table, and if people really need them, they can pick them up.
Yeah.
Not really broadcast it so much, but just say, hey, if you have a special dietary restriction, we've got 10, 15, 20 of these. Just take one instead of the regular bread. I'm thinking about that. I wonder if that would be valuable or helpful, or if there's something I'm missing, even in that. Am I really helping? Does unleavened bread get us out of this? I don't. I'm not a gluten-free expert. So if people have opinions, I'd love to hear them. And then secondly, I've wrestled with this a lot with our older folks. When we had to do the lids they had the cover on them because of COVID, and you had to peel it back. I saw so many people struggling to get that paper separated.
Yeah.
But then it kind of, we're not doing that anymore. But I even started noticing the little cups. If you have any kind of palsy or tremor, it's really, really difficult to drink out of that little cup. And so I'm wondering, is it worth us maybe trying to find some way? We could get a larger cup, even like what we can have 10 or 15 up there and just put a little juice in there. It would just be easier for an older person, say, or a handicapped person to drink from. So I'm thinking about something like that. Someone may have a much better idea than I do, but I want it to be inclusive as possible and easy for people.
Yeah.
And I don't want people nervous about spilling or so.
That is a great idea.
Those are things I'm wrestling with, and if anybody's listening has great ideas on those, I'd love to hear them.
I'm speaking for the gluten-free crowd, I'm not to the point where when we take Lord's Supper that it's like crazy on me.
Yeah, is that enough? Is that enough to trigger?
But there are some people, I'm thinking specifically of one woman, like celiac. Like,
yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I've also thought, hey, we could just say it's Lord's Supper. If you have any issues with the elements we use, bring a substitute.
Yeah, bring your own cracker.
Bring your own. I mean, there's never any harm. I can say that carte blanche right here on the podcast. There's never any harm. As we've said, the elements themselves are not sacrilegious. Bring a substitute. I'm not going to roll an eye at you. And truth is, no one will notice if you're sitting over there and you reach in and get your own drink and bring your own cracker out. I mean, I don't, if someone does notice, send them to me and I'll defend you.
But I think I feel where you're coming from. There is something, I think, within the heart of the pastoral desire that I think God gives us, where we want to be able to provide that.
Correct.
We want to.
I feel like that's my obligation on that day, and I'm giving people freedom to do what they need to do. But I would prefer to have great solutions that we as a church can roll out there.
Yeah. Or my wife's gotten into gluten-free sourdough.
She just bake us a loaf.
Let's bake us a loaf.
Yeah.
Hey, me and the gluten-free crowd, we get sourdough. Y'all have your own little
Nobody will
styrofoam.
complain.
Yeah.
So it'd be a lot better than what we take in the rest of us. So.
But anyways, hey, been a very helpful conversation.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, and fun. But
thank you, sir.
Anyways, till next time.
We'll be here.